Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Barabbas Show. Today is episode 1 on February 25th, 2022. And I am sorry for getting this episode out late. This week and last week has been hectic for me. I booked a last minute trip to Toronto and I enjoyed my time, but I procrastinated on a lot of stuff too. So, once again, I'm sorry that this episode got out so late. You know what? For all I know, I might post this on the very next day if you're watching this. My name is Stilo Shuttles. I am your host, and without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, I want to get through some of the topics I'll be talking about this episode. First topic, who am I to begin with? Secondly, I'll address the podcast themes and the core values and ideas. Thirdly, I want to go over who is Barabbas and why is he important. And fourthly, why should we rethink our perspective of Barabbas? So, Steel Shuttles, you're probably thinking, what type of corny name does this dude have? And I'm just going to put it out there, this is not my real name, of course. This is just a pseudonym, I guess. It's just easier for people to call me Steel compared to my real name. If you want to know what it is, Instagram page has it. I am currently a university student that's doing full-time studies in communications and media studies. Third year. I'm somewhat in limbo, I guess. But yeah, I just love my program so far. I dive deep into journalism. I dive deep into media and the world around media. So that's news, photography, film, music, journalism, anything pretty much. And it's kind of connected to who I am as a videographer and photographer. I love these two forms of media and art. I can tell stories using images, videos, stills, through music videos, through films, through portraits, through street photography, through even business shoots. And I've connected so many good people. Yeah, so far I'm loving my program. Though I didn't used to be an English major, but that's a story for another day. My faith is something I am fairly open with, and I'm not really afraid to talk about. I am first and foremost Christian, Protestant, I guess you'd call it, but I consider myself a Reformed charismatic, so I do hold to some Reformed teachings, but I don't believe that the gifts have ceased or anything. But I'm also not a complete continuationist. I'll leave that up to interpretation. But yeah, my faith journey has been a pretty long one and a pretty wild one, and maybe I might open up about it in a future episode. All depends on what God decides. It's all His will and His decision and His timing. This podcast doesn't hold to any sort of hard denominational views, so just because I'm Reformed, don't think I'm only gonna speak about Reformed theology or speak about theology through a Reformed lens. And just because I'm charismatic, don't think that I'm going to write off everybody that is a cessationist or a mild cessationist or whatsoever. I am just going to talk about faith, politics, social issues, and everyday life. For all we know, one episode I might just talk about absolute nothingness, but I'm going to have fun doing it. So, let's get started on Barabbas. Now, let's first go to Matthew 27:15-26. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted, and they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife said word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. So we see here that when it came time for Jesus' crucifixion, Jerusalem's Jewish community had called for the release of a notorious prisoner named Barabbas. Pontius Pilate, the governor of the land during this time, had to ask thrice on whether Jesus was to be killed in place of Barabbas. The constant questioning of Pilate here is something that we don't often see or think about when it comes to this moment in the Bible? I do find this to be intriguing. We then see Pilate wash his hands and say this. We then see Pilate wash his hands and say that he is not responsible for what happens. Instead, the fault will lie on Jerusalem's Jewish people. Let us now move on to Mark 15:6-15. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner from whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of the envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Now we get a little more context into who Barabbas is. He was a rebel during the insurrection against Rome, I presume, or whoever was leader at that time. He had murdered, and he was essentially a militant. This caused him to be locked up and ruled him as a traitor. Luke 23 goes a little bit more in depth too. But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they keep shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found him in no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. In this passage, we actually see Pilate desires to release Jesus. Interesting. Perhaps this shows a little more of Pilate's moral compass than we actually are more accustomed to. Let us finally wrap up with John. So this is a little short passage, not even a passage, a verse I should just say. They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. The short verse now tells us that Barabbas is indeed a thief. Small piece to think about, but it still adds another layer to the kind of person Barabbas is. So what was the point of me bringing up Barabbas? And why did I choose to name my podcast Modern Barabbas, Faith with Futility? It comes down to this. I am a Barabbas. I don't mean that literally. It's more symbolic. Think about it like this. I constantly sin every day, disobey God every day, break God's law every day, and still for some reason, Jesus loves me. Now, granted, I don't try to sin to abuse God's grace. It's more so sinful nature. I still strive to be a man of integrity. Don't get me wrong. But I feel like a lot of us look at the Bible characters very harshly. We try to think of ourselves better than them because we have Jesus. Or some of us might say, "Oh, I'll never be a Barabbas," or even worse, "I'll never be an Adam or Eve. I'll always obey God. I'll always follow him." But some of us fail to take our cross up daily. Some of us look at these biblical figures with pity and shame instead of realizing that they're just as human as we are. We could have been Barabbas. If anything, we are Barabbas. While we don't get crucified, we do deserve the death that comes after this life. We deserve to be thrown into the hellfire of pits of damnation. We deserve to see every single horror that we inflicted times 10 on us, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Lord knows I do not want to do that. But Jesus walked and he took onto the cross himself. He walked so that Barabbas may be free. And don't tell me that this is coincidental that Barabbas is there. This is all symbolic through historical events. Jesus knew that it would have been Barabbas in that position. And I know I sound very Calvinistic here, but it's not coincidence. Barabbas was in that prison for a reason. He was a rebel. He fought against the Romans, and he ultimately tried to, or actually he did kill some people, and he did rob a few places, but he still walked free. I don't know what happened to Barabbas after the crucifixion, or even after him leaving prison and being set free. He must have been pretty surprised and shocked at what has happened. An innocent man goes and takes his punishment on the cross so that he doesn't have to. And he was one of the most despised people in the city of Jerusalem at this time. It's interesting. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. And it's symbolic right there. that kind of encapsulates what we mean by salvation. Barabbas is free. He gets to walk out. He doesn't have to face justice for what he did because Jesus took it for us. An influencer I follow named Samuel Jabwan, he wrote that we should see the cross as something as we should be up there. We should be grieving. We should be almost saddened that Jesus took our punishment. But we should also look to resurrection and go, that is going to be me. Now, why should we rethink Barabbas here? As I said, we look at Barabbas as someone who is unsavable, as someone irredeemable, as someone that is deserving of their punishment. But often it's kind of hypocritical. Why don't we look at ourselves that way sometimes? Sometimes we do pride ourselves and make ourselves exalted over those who aren't saved or who haven't accepted Jesus. And it's all a pride issue. It's all something that we need to work on. I know for me, I especially need to still work on. There's a humble balance between pridefulness and humility, and trying to be fake humble doesn't bring about humility. It brings about pridefulness in a different way. So instead of looking at yourselves as someone that's irredeemable, you should look at yourself as someone who's been set free. And instead of looking at yourself as someone that's higher than those unredeemable, look at yourself as someone who could have been in their position and was in their position. Well, that wraps up today's episode, and I know it's been short, but this is what I just wanted to do to introduce this podcast. I am a modern Barabbas, and I am someone who could walk because Jesus took that punishment for me. And you know what? That is something that's still so profound to me. It's still something that blows my mind every time I think about it. Well, that concludes the episode, and I hope to catch you guys in the next one. Sorry for the delay once again. God bless y'all. One love.